Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by welcoming everybody to this very important workshop, this validation workshop of the National AfCFTA strategy. I'd like to start firstly by thanking the Ministry of Finance, Economic Planning and Trade, Minister Payet, the focal person Jean-Paul, Director General Charles, for their support while we've been working with the consultants and our development partners to elaborate this strategy. It's nice to see we have a good representation in the room to discuss the outcome of that today. Like Pretty, I'd like to stress it's a collective work. The AfCFTA is a very, very big project, continental-wise, very ambitious, but extremely strategic for a country like Seychelles and very important for the economic future of the continent. And so because it's so ambitious, it is impossible that one single UN agency or a development partner assists alone. We need collaborative efforts, and I think this strategy has been a very good example of that because we've been working closely with our colleagues in UNDP and also GIZ to help deliver this strategy. And going forward, I think that's going to be the modus operandi of delivering on the AfCFTA, simply because of the complexity of this agreement. I'd like to also particularly thank the consultants, Danilo and Elizabeth, for the work they've put into this strategy. This is a very well written document, one of the best strategies I've personally been involved with. We have colleagues here from Addis Ababa, led by a colleague Marlet here. They've been helping countries across the continent develop these strategies. And now I think in total it's over 40 countries have strategies, and we've been directly involved in about 38. Is that correct, the figure? Yeah, so our colleagues in Addis Ababa actually have an incredible amount of work to do because member states from the 55 AU member states across the continent have been asking for technical support to develop such strategies. So yeah, we'd like to thank them also for their help and collaboration in this. Let me just make a few remarks on the importance of this strategic document. The AfCFTA, as the strategy document very well explains, represents both opportunities, presents opportunities and also challenges for the continent. So let me speak firstly to a few of the opportunities. The opportunity is clearly creating an integrated continental market of 1.4 billion people, over 3 billion economy, $3 billion US dollars in terms of economic size. That represents a very large, substantial market. And I think those of you that were present during the previous workshop that we did, you would have seen the statistics there where I pointed out that individually countries like Seychelles are very tiny and don't actually make much of an impact on global economic affairs. But collectively, the African economy is very, very high up the ranking, depending on how you measure it, anywhere between number 4 and number 6 in the world in terms of economic size. And although the African continent is a relatively poor continent, it's one which is also growing very rapidly, much higher than the global average. And that makes it an attractive market where there's new opportunities to move into. So I think that's the first thing to stress. The second opportunity I'd just like to stress now, having a common market, which is the ultimate objective because it starts as a free trade area, but the objective is to create a common market as per the Abuja Treaty of 1991. Having a common market means applying common standards, which will reduce business costs and increase opportunities for scale economies across the continent and reduce prices for consumers as well. So there's a lot of economic benefits from the continent coming together economically. Now, some of the challenges, well, particularly for a small country like Seychelles, just in terms of the negotiations, it's tremendously demanding. I noticed on page 44 of the document, you list all the committees in which you have to be present. And I know Charles has been actively working in some of those committees. The negotiation process has been really quite complex, and the next stage, the implementation, which we're currently in, possibly even more challenging. The strategy also stresses as one of the challenges the need for greater connectivity and investment, for example, in port facilities. Just the other week, I was with the executive secretary, and we had a meeting from the ambassador of Comoros, and he was lamenting the difficulty that they have in terms of connectivity, both with neighbouring islands and also with the mainland. And I think this is a common challenge for the island states in the region. Another colleague from Mauritius was explaining how once upon a time the economic links with Madagascar were much stronger, and they had joint business interests, and those are no longer so strong as they were. So I think a degree of investment, a greater degree of investment in creating intra-island connectivity is one of the outcomes from the AfCFTA and needs to be given some consideration, as well as connectivity to the rest of the continent, of course. Now, distance, it comes up several times in the strategy as being a handicap for Seychelles. But for a lot of kinds of business these days, distance costs are no longer so important, especially as we shift towards a knowledge-based service economy. Distance doesn't mean so much. So I think some of these challenges actually could be overcome and actually become a potential source of advantage for an economy like Seychelles. This document is actually quite a strategic one. I think some of the reflections speak really to where the economic future of the country resides. Now, I know your islands are very much solicited in the past, your history, the English and the British and the French fought over these islands for a long time. I know since independence as well, you had a lot of interest from South Africa and the former Soviet Union. Many countries have been very solicitous, let's say, of Seychelles Island in the past. And clearly your strategic location means that you have one foot in the Indian Ocean there with, neighbouring Asia on the one hand, the Middle East and Africa. That can really play to the Seychelles' advantage, I think, going forward. And clearly we would argue, as I think Priti said, your economic future, we believe, is clearly within the African continent and playing a lead in terms of actually implementing this African continental free trade area. Now, on the good news is actually the implications of implementing the tariff reductions will have relatively little economic impact because you already have a fairly liberal trade policy. You've reduced tariffs under SADC anyway. And I think there's a lot of arguments in this document for Seychelles becoming one of the cheerleaders and actually champions of the Continental Agreement, being one of the first countries to implement the protocols. I know there's one element which is a little bit more sensitive, which is the free movement protocol for Seychelles. But even then, I think in our workshop we discussed there are caveats and provisos in that agreement which allow member states to protect strategic goals of their own. And the document does actually point out the skills shortages, for example, that Seychelles has to address in some sectors. The free movement protocol of the AfCFTA would be one way to address that. So I think even in areas where there are some concerns expressed, you could usefully leverage elements of this agreement to improve your economic prospects in the future. So, having said all that, I'd just like to stress on behalf of our Executive Secretary, Clava Getete, ECA's continued support to Seychelles. Our office from the sub-regional office in Kigali, we've been helping assisting Seychelles in different areas. So, for example, just a few weeks ago, we had another workshop on cruise tourism here. We specialize in the sub-regional office on deepening regional integration within Eastern Africa. And we do that through the issue of the blue economy, on the one hand, which of course Seychelles has been championing since the very beginning. And your former president, Michel, has a very important book on that particular topic, and was very instrumental in promoting that area of work. We work a lot on tourism as well. And then AfCFTA trade and regional integration. And I'd just like to close by expressing our willingness to continue to collaborate with the authorities in Seychelles. It's always a pleasure to come here and work with our counterparts in government here. and be involved also with the private sector and other stakeholders. So with those opening words, I'd like to thank you for all coming this morning to this workshop, and I look forward to listening to the subsequent discussions. Thank you.